The reunion he never expected. The secret she kept for 5 years. When Jackson met Dorothy again, he discovered a truth that would change his life forever. The park buzzed with the low murmur of a Houston afternoon. The laughter of children mixed with the distant hiss of traffic and the occasional bark of a dog. Jackson heard none of it. He walked at a quick pace, a man accustomed to motion, to purpose, though today his mind drifted aimlessly. His polished shoes struck the path rhythmically, the weight of the day hunching his shoulders. And then he saw her. At first, it was a fleeting glimpse. A woman sitting on a worn-out bench, her head bowed. Nearby, 2 children played, their laughter sharper, more alive than the others. Jackson slowed, not knowing what had caught his eye, until the woman shifted slightly, and the sunlight illuminated her profile. It couldn't be. His feet froze before his mind reacted. Dorothy. Her name came unbidden, catching in his throat. A careless knot bound her hair, which was once bright and smooth. Her clothes hung loosely, a worn fabric that told a story of its own. What struck him most, however, was her posture. A quiet, but undeniable, exhaustion. She sat with her hands loosely clasped, her shoulders curved inward, as if shielding herself from the world. He approached cautiously at first, the crunch of the gravel under his feet betraying his presence. She looked up, startled, her wide eyes fixed on his. "Dorothy," he said, his voice low, testing the name as if it might disappear. Her expression faltered. Recognition. Panic. Something else he couldn't decipher. She straightened, her hands moving instinctively to smooth the fabric of her skirt. "Jackson," she replied, her voice firm but cool. "It's been a while." "A while?" The understatement felt like a punch. 5 years. No word. No explanation. And now, here she was, sitting in a park with 2 boys older than 4. "I didn't expect to see you," he managed to say, his gaze shifting to the children. One of them, a bright-eyed boy with a tangle of dark curls, was laughing as he chased a falling leaf. The other lagged behind, quieter, his small hand clutching the edge of the bench. Dorothy followed his gaze, her lips tightening into a thin line. Life is full of surprises. Her tone told him not to press the conversation. "Can I buy you a coffee?" He gestured to the small cafe visible just beyond the park's gates. Her hesitation was palpable. She looked at the children, then back at him. "I don't think so. It's just coffee," he interrupted, his voice softening. "Please." A pause. The pause stretched, making her feel vulnerable. Finally, she nodded. "All right, but not for long." They walked in silence, the children trailing behind them. In the cafe, Jackson ordered 2 coffees, while Dorothy settled the children at a corner table with 2 small cups of juice. When she finally sat across from him, she seemed somehow smaller, her hands tightly wrapped around the ceramic mug. "How have you been?" he asked, his voice as neutral as he could make it. "Fine," she said quickly, her eyes flicking nervously toward the children. "We're getting by." Her clipped tone left no room for more details. Jackson leaned back slightly, observing her. The Dorothy he remembered had been vibrant and self-assured. This Dorothy seemed more of a shadow, her light dimmed but not extinguished. "The children," he ventured cautiously. "They are mine," she said sharply, as if daring him to ask for anything more. "And their father?" He regretted the question the moment it left his lips, her eyes flashing with something. Anger? Hurt? Perhaps both. "That's not a conversation I'm ready to have." The air between them grew thick, and Jackson did not press. Instead, he changed the subject. "They seem like lovely boys, full of energy." Her shoulders relaxed slightly. "They are. Dennis is the loud one. Dennis is insatiably curious and always on the move. Daniel is quieter, more thoughtful." Jackson nodded, filing away the names. and the small details she offered. He glanced at the clock on the wall. Time was running out, and he was no closer to understanding why she had disappeared, or why she seemed so determined to keep the truth locked away. When they were finished, he stood. "Let me walk you home." "You don't have to," she said, but there was no conviction in her words. "I want to." The walk to her apartment was silent, broken only by the children's chatter. When they reached the building, Jackson felt a cold knot in his stomach. The structure was crumbling at the edges, its paint faded and peeling. A narrow staircase led to the second floor. The handrail was rusted. "Dorothy," he began, his voice trailing off as she turned to face him. "I appreciate the coffee, Jackson," she said, her tone firm and final. "Goodbye." He stood there as she went up the stairs, the sound of her footsteps fading into the distance. The door closed softly behind her, but Jackson stood immobile, staring up at the building as if it were about to reveal its mysteries. And then he turned and walked away, a silent resolve taking hold of him. Something had to change. The past revealed. The next morning, the memory of Dorothy's tired eyes clung to Jackson like a shadow over his breakfast. He stirred his coffee absently, the clinking of the spoon against the porcelain echoing in the otherwise silent kitchen. He had barely slept, tormented by questions and the image of her rundown apartment building. By mid-morning, he found himself back at her door, his hand poised to knock. The hallway smelled faintly of damp plaster, and the muffled sounds of life seeped through the thin walls. After a moment, the door creaked open, and Dorothy appeared, her expression a mix of surprise and defensive resignation. "Jackson," she said, her voice low. "What are you doing here?" "I couldn't leave it," he replied, his tone firm but not cruel. "Can we talk?" She hesitated, her grip on the doorframe tightening. From inside, the sound of sharp, uncontainable laughter spilled into the hallway. Dorothy glanced over her shoulder before stepping aside. "All right, but keep your voice down," she said, opening the door wider. The apartment felt even smaller in the daylight. The furniture was sparse and mismatched, and the walls had yellowed with age. Jackson watched Dennis and Daniel playing with a makeshift fort of blankets and chairs, their giggling a harsh contrast to the somber atmosphere. Dorothy crossed her arms as Jackson turned to face her. "What do you want, Jackson?" He hesitated, his gaze going to the children before returning to her. "Are they mine?" Her face tightened, the question hanging in the air between them. She exhaled sharply, a sound more of exhaustion than frustration. "Yes," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "They're yours." The word hit him hard, making him voiceless for a moment. His eyes moved to the children again, Dennis with his boundless energy, Daniel quieter, more thoughtful. The resemblance was now impossible to ignore. 5 years, he said, his voice choked. "I've had 5 years of missing their lives. It's been 5 years, Dorothy." "Why?" Her jaw tightened, her posture becoming rigid like a shield. "It's not that simple," she said, her words clipped. "Then make it simple," he responded, his frustration overflowing. "You disappeared, Dorothy. You left, and now I find out about." He stopped, taking a deep breath. His voice softened. "I deserve to know why." Dorothy's gaze dropped to the floor, her fingers tracing the edge of the counter, as if she were looking for something solid to hold on to. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she said after a long pause. "For them, for you, for me." The disbelief in his voice was unmistakable. "You think this is what I would have wanted? To find out about my children this way?" Her silence was answer enough. Jackson ran a hand through his hair, walking to the edge of the room and back. "They deserve better than this," he said finally, his voice firm but decided. "You can't keep living like this, Dorothy. They can't." She lifted her head sharply, her eyes narrowing. "What are you suggesting?" "Come live with me," he said, the words leaving no room for argument. Dorothy blinked. "That's not." "It's not negotiable," he interrupted, his tone soft but firm. "They are my children too, and I want them to have a stable home. I want you to have a stable home." Dorothy shook her head, her hands clenching at her sides. "I don't need your charity, Jackson." "This isn't charity," he said, stepping closer. "It's responsibility. It's about giving them the chance to grow up without worrying about leaky roofs and broken heaters." He gestured to the apartment. "This isn't good enough for them, Dorothy. You know it." Her eyes shone with unshed tears, but she didn't let them fall. She turned away, focusing on the children, who were now watching them with curiosity. "Give me time," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "I need time to think." Jackson nodded, though his jaw was tight. "Take all the time you need, but I'm not going anywhere. They're my family too." He turned to leave, stopping at the door. He looked back and said, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For whatever made you think you had to do this alone." Dorothy did not reply, but the look on her face, a mix of determination and vulnerability, stayed with him as he walked away. Outside, the Houston air was thick and humid, clinging to his skin as he headed to his car. His mind raced with plans, with questions. But one thought rose above the chaos. He wasn't going to let them get away again. A new beginning. 3 days passed before Jackson returned. This time, he wouldn't leave without an answer. As he climbed the narrow, creaking stairs to Dorothy's apartment, his resolve hardened. He knocked twice, the sound echoing in the dim hallway. The door opened just enough to show Dorothy's face. "Jackson," she said with a sigh, her voice laced with resignation and fatigue. "You don't give up, do you?" "Not when it comes to this," he replied, his tone firm. "I'm serious, Dorothy. The boys, Dennis and Daniel, they deserve better. You deserve better." Her grip on the door tightened. For a moment it seemed she would refuse again. But then she looked over her shoulder at the cluttered apartment, the cracked walls, and the 2 little boys sitting on the floor with their makeshift toys. "Give me a minute," she murmured, closing the door. When she reopened it, Dennis and Daniel were by her side, each clutching a small, hastily packed bag. Dorothy stood behind them, an unreadable expression on her face. "We'll try," she said, her voice lower now. "But it's just for the boys. Don't think this changes anything between us." Jackson knelt to the children's level. "Hi," he said, smiling softly. "You're coming to stay with me for a while. Does that sound good?" Dennis nodded eagerly, his big eyes shining. Daniel, always the quieter one, clung to his mother's leg, but nodded with a small, hesitant smile. The drive to Jackson's apartment was uneventful, broken only by Dennis's excited chatter and Daniel's cautious silence. When they arrived, Jackson opened the door to his spacious, minimalist apartment, its polished surfaces and sleek furniture a stark contrast to Dorothy's cramped, run-down space. Dennis bolted inside, his face lighting up as he explored the living room. "It's so big!" he exclaimed, spinning around in the open space. Daniel stayed back, his small hand clutching Dorothy's. His eyes scanned the unfamiliar surroundings, his grip tightening. Dorothy walked in slowly, her gaze sweeping over the apartment. The high ceilings, the pristine walls, and the modern decor made her feel as if she didn't belong. She set the children's bags near the sofa, keeping her arms crossed as if to protect herself. "You didn't have to do all this," she said, her voice low. "Yes, I did," Jackson retorted, his tone even. "It's what they deserve." Jackson found himself torn between fascination and frustration as the hours passed. Dennis adapted quickly, asking a million questions about the apartment and about Jackson himself. "What's this for?" Dennis asked, pointing to a sleek coffee machine on the counter. Jackson chuckled. "It makes coffee. Want to see how it works?" Dennis nodded eagerly, and Jackson showed him how to push the buttons, explaining each step. Daniel watched from the edge of the kitchen, his arms wrapped around his small body. Dorothy, meanwhile, stayed in the background, observing. She watched Jackson's attempts to connect with both boys, but Daniel responded to his efforts with a cautious hesitation. Still, he didn't give up, kneeling to Daniel's level when he spoke to him, or offering him small gestures of encouragement. "He's shy," she said softly, a touch of apology in her voice. Jackson looked at her. "He's cautious," he corrected gently. "That's not a bad thing." That night, Dorothy stood by the window, staring out at the city skyline, after Jackson had hastily furnished the children's guest room. The silence of the apartment felt almost oppressive, broken only by the hum of the air conditioner. "You're quiet," Jackson said, walking into the room. Dorothy turned, her arms still crossed. "This feels temporary," she said simply. "Like it's not real." "It's real," Jackson said, his voice firm but kind. "And it doesn't have to be temporary." She did not reply, her gaze returning to the window. Later that night, as he was tidying the living room, Jackson found something tucked behind a stack of old books on a shelf. He pulled it out, a small, framed photo. His breath caught as he looked at it. It was Dorothy. The photo was from years ago, from when their world had been simpler, from when they had believed that nothing could break them. She was laughing, her head thrown back, her eyes bright with joy. He sank onto the couch, the photo still in his hand. Memories flooded him, of laughter, of promises whispered in the dark, of a future they had once imagined together. And then, as suddenly as before, the pain of her absence resurfaced, sharp and relentless. Jackson sat there for a long time, the photo resting on his lap, as the questions he had long buried came rushing back. Facing the truth, Dorothy stood in the doorway of the children's room, watching Dennis animatedly show Jackson a drawing he had made that day. Jackson was kneeling by the bed, his tie loosened and his shirt sleeves rolled up, an image of relaxed concentration. Daniel sat nearby, quieter, but his small hand rested lightly on Jackson's knee. It was a gesture of quiet trust, one that made Dorothy's chest ache. She had pictured this scene in her mind countless times over the years, but now witnessing it, the reality felt sharper, more complicated. Relief mixed with anxiety, clawing at the edges of her resolve. She turned away, retreating to the quiet of the living room. The hum of the city outside offered little comfort. Dorothy sank onto the couch, her fingers tracing the hem of her sleeve as memories began to stir, uninvited and unwelcome. It was the photo at the hotel that had shattered everything. The image had arrived in her inbox with cruel precision. Jackson, his arm around a woman named Emma, leading her into a hotel room. Emma's head was leaned into him, their close proximity intimate, undeniable. Dorothy had been unable to breathe. She had stared at the screen, the edges of her vision blurring as her world came crashing down. Her mind had betrayed her, replaying every word of love Jackson had ever said to her, now clouded with doubt. She remembered the excuses, late meetings, business trips. She had believed him. She had trusted him. And yet, there was the proof, cold, hard, inescapable. Hard. She clenched her hands into fists, the phantom pain of that moment still in her chest. She had left not out of anger, but out of desperation. Staying had felt impossible. Facing him, pretending that nothing had changed, had felt like a lie too heavy to carry. But now, as she glanced toward the children's room, she wondered if her choice had been a mistake. "Dorothy," Jackson's voice broke through her thoughts. She looked up to see him standing in the doorway. He no longer wore his tie, and his expression was serious. She straightened, masking her turmoil. "What is it?" He walked into the room, a look of firm but hurt frustration on his face. "I can't help but notice it. You've kept your distance. You're here, but it's as if you're hiding something. I can see it. The boys can feel it too." Her defenses shot up instantly. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. His tone was firm, but not cruel. This isn't just about the boys. It's about us. Whatever happened 5 years ago didn't just affect you. I lost something too. Dorothy stood up, crossing her arms instinctively. This isn't the time, Jackson. When is the time, Dorothy? When are you going to let me in? The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truths. She turned away, her gaze fixed on the dark city skyline. You don't want to know, she said in a low voice, her voice trembling despite her effort to keep it steady. Yes, I do, he insisted. He walked closer, his voice dropping. I deserve to know why you left. I deserve to know why you didn't trust me enough to stay. She held her breath, the words cutting her deeper than he could know. She fought the urge to lash out, to deflect with anger. Instead, she swallowed hard and spoke carefully. I left because it was the only thing I could do. For me, for the boys, for you. For me? He repeated, incredulous. How does leaving me in the dark, missing out on my children's lives, possibly be for me? Dorothy's grip on her emotions faltered. I believed you had moved on, Jackson, she said, her voice cracking. I thought there was someone else. The confession silenced him, his eyebrows furrowing in confusion. What are you talking about? She shook her head, refusing to elaborate. It doesn't matter anymore. Yes, it does matter, he said firmly. If you thought I had moved on, why didn't you confront me? Why didn't you ask me the truth? Her silence was her only answer. Jackson exhaled sharply, his frustration evident. Fine, he said at last. If you're not ready to tell me, I won't press you. But I'm not letting this go, Dorothy, not until I understand what happened. She watched him leave the room, her heart aching in her chest. The truth of betrayal. Later that night, Dorothy found herself standing in the hallway, her hand resting on the doorframe of the children's room. Jackson was there again, his voice low as he read from a storybook. Dennis was splayed out on the bed, his head propped on his hands, while Daniel leaned against Jackson, his eyes half closed. Dorothy's breath caught at the sight of the scene. Jackson's face was softened as he read, his concentration entirely on the children. It was a side of him she hadn't allowed herself to think about, a piece of the man she had loved so deeply and tried so hard to forget. But watching him now, she felt something shift, a crack in the armor she had so carefully built. She couldn't deny it. A part of her wanted to believe again. She retreated back into the shadows, unseen, her emotions a silent storm. The morning sun bathed Jackson's sleek car in light as he sped down the long driveway toward Patricia's property. The imposing iron gate swung open smoothly, revealing manicured lawns and a mansion that screamed wealth and control. Jackson gripped the steering wheel tightly, his jaw set with a determination that hadn't wavered since the previous night. The memories of Dorothy's words haunted him. I believed you had moved on. Her voice, shaky and raw, had left him with more questions than answers. There was only one person who could possibly have the missing piece of the puzzle, someone who had never supported his relationship with Dorothy, his mother, Patricia. Jackson parked in front of the grand entrance, his polished shoes echoing on the stone steps as he walked up. The heavy oak door opened before he could knock, and an elegantly dressed butler greeted him with a slight bow. Mr. Carter, your mother is expecting you in the living room. Jackson nodded, walking into the house. The air inside was cool and smelled faintly of fresh flowers, but there was an unshakable chill, as if the warmth of family had been left out of the architectural plans. Patricia was seated, poised, on a cream-colored sofa, her posture as regal as her pearls. She looked up as Jackson entered, her smile thin and controlled. Jackson, darling, this is an unexpected visit. Would you like some coffee? No, thank you, he said dryly, standing near the edge of the room as if proximity alone could burn him. She raised an eyebrow. Straight to the point, then. Did you know Dorothy thought I was with someone else? He asked, skipping the pleasantries. Patricia blinked, her serene expression faltering just a little. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Jackson took a step closer, his voice tight. "She left because she thought I was with Emma. She saw a photo of us going into a hotel together. A photo that I didn't even know existed." Patricia's fingers tightened around her teacup before she set it down with a deliberate motion. "And what makes you think I have anything to do with this supposed misunderstanding?" Jackson's gaze pierced her. "Because you never wanted me to be with Dorothy. Because you thought she wasn't good enough for me." Patricia's smile vanished completely, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "Jackson, you're being ridiculous. I wanted what was best for you, as any mother would." "What's best for me?" he repeated bitterly. "You think it was what was best for me to lose 5 years of my children's lives? To have Dorothy believe I betrayed her?" She stood slowly, her polished composure cracking just enough to reveal the steel underneath. "Dorothy was never right for you," she said sharply. "She would have held you back. Everything you've accomplished, everything you've built. You think that would have been possible with her in the picture?" Jackson's fists clenched at his sides. "This isn't about my career, Mother. It's about the woman I loved. The mother of my children. You had no right." "Oh." Patricia's mouth opened as if to argue, but her words faltered. She turned to the window, the sunlight casting long shadows across the room. "Aaron and we just wanted to protect you. Emma was hired to test her resolve, yes, but the photo, it was meant to open her eyes to the reality that she didn't belong in your world." Jackson took a step back as if the revelation had physically hit him. "You're telling me you orchestrated the whole thing? That you and Aaron set this up?" Patricia's silence was answer enough. "I trusted you," he said, his voice cracking. "You took everything from me, and for what? For some twisted idea of what my life should be like?" Patricia's gaze hardened. "Dorothy will only bring you trouble, Jackson. She already has. You've spent years trying to build something of value, and now you're willing to throw it all away for—" "Stop!" Jackson interrupted her, his voice like a whip. "You don't get to decide what has value in my life. You don't get to decide who I love." Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line, but she did not argue. Jackson turned toward the door, his footsteps deliberate. As he reached the threshold, her voice stopped him. "If you think this changes anything, you're wrong. Dorothy will never fit into this family. She'll ruin you, Jackson." He did not turn back. "You already did, Mother." The door closed behind him with a final quietness, leaving Patricia alone in the cavernous room. Outside, the air felt heavier than before. Jackson sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel, his thoughts a chaotic storm. His mother's words echoed in his ears, but they only strengthened his resolve. Whatever his family had destroyed, he would rebuild. He owed Dorothy and his sons that much. The confession, the sun hung low in the Houston sky as Jackson parked his car in front of the apartment. His conversation with Patricia still churned in his mind, a volatile mix of rage and regret. He got out, steeling himself for what was to come. Dorothy deserved the truth, no matter how hard it was to share. Inside, the apartment was quiet, save for the occasional murmurs of the boys playing in their room. Dorothy was sitting at the dining table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She looked up as he entered, her expression defensive. "You're back," she said simply, her tone revealing nothing. Jackson nodded, taking off his jacket and draping it over a chair. "We need to talk." Her grip on the mug tightened, but she didn't move. "I'm listening." He sat across from her, leaning forward, his elbows on the table. "I went to see my mother today. I needed answers, and now I have them." Dorothy's eyes narrowed slightly, her suspicion evident. "And," Jackson took a deep breath, his shoulders tense. "The photo you saw, the one that made you leave, it was a setup. My mother and Aaron orchestrated the whole thing. They hired Emma, they staged the situation, and they made sure you saw it." Dorothy's fingers went slack, and the mug trembled slightly against the table. She stared at him, her expression a mix of disbelief and hurt. "You're saying that the whole thing was a fake?" Jackson nodded. "I didn't know it at the time. That day, Emma said she wasn't feeling well. We were at the hotel for a business meeting, and I helped her get a room to rest. That was it. Nothing happened. I had no idea a photo existed. I didn't know they used it to drive you away." His voice broke a little, the weight of the confession pressing down on him. Dorothy leaned back, crossing her arms over her chest like a shield. Her breathing was ragged as she processed his words. "So, you're telling me," she said slowly, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and heartbreak, "that for 5 years everything I believed was a lie. That I threw our lives away over an invention." Jackson's jaw was tight, his eyes filled with remorse. "Yes, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Dorothy. You didn't deserve that. None of us did." She stood up abruptly, walking to the window, her hands in her hair. "I don't even know how to feel right now," she said, her voice cracking. "It's been 5 years, Jackson. 5 years that I spent believing you betrayed me. 5 years raising our sons alone." He got up too, keeping his distance. "I know. I can never give you those years back. But I want to make things right. I want to make things right for you, for Dennis, and for Daniel. If you'll let me." Her shoulders slumped slightly, the rage subsiding and giving way to exhaustion. "This doesn't erase everything, Jackson. The hurt, the distrust, it doesn't go away overnight." "I don't expect it to," he said softly. "But I'm not going anywhere, Dorothy. Not again." She turned to face him, her eyes searching his for something. Truth, certainty, perhaps both. The redemption the following days passed in an uneasy truce. Dorothy remained guarded, but the walls she had built were no longer impenetrable. Jackson focused on the children, his efforts genuine and tireless. He read to them, played with them, and answered their endless questions with a patience Dorothy hadn't expected. Always full of energy, Dennis quickly took to Jackson, pulling him into his world of curiosity and imagination. Daniel, slower to trust, began to follow his lead. One afternoon, Dorothy watched Jackson teaching Daniel how to tie his shoes. "Like this," Jackson said, his voice soft but firm. "Loop the lace, pull it tight, there you go." Daniel looked up, a shy smile spreading across his face. "Thanks, Dad." The word hit Jackson hard, his throat tightening, but he managed to smile back. "Anytime, buddy." Dorothy watched from the doorway, her hand pressed against the frame. The scene moved her, something fragile, yet undeniable. On Saturday, Jackson proposed a family outing. "There's a park not far from here," he suggested. "The boys can run around for a bit, and we can get out of the house." Dorothy hesitated, but the children's enthusiasm tipped the scales. The day was bright and clear, the park filled with families. Dennis and Daniel ran across the lawn, their laughter infectious. For a moment, Dorothy allowed herself to relax, sitting on a bench beside Jackson. "You're so good with them," she said in a low voice, surprising herself. Jackson turned to her, his expression warm. "They make it easy." Before she could reply, a sharp cry cut through the air. Dorothy's heart sank as she saw Dennis collapse on the grass. "Dennis!" she yelled, running toward him. Jackson was already there, scooping the boy into his arms. "Call an ambulance," he said, his voice tight with panic. Dorothy fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed. As the ambulance arrived, the world became a cacophony of sirens and frantic movement. Dorothy clung to a sobbing Daniel, while Jackson got into the ambulance with Dennis. Her heart pounded as she watched the vehicle drive away, Jackson's pale face visible through the back window. Standing in the empty park, Dorothy hugged Daniel tightly, the weight of the moment crushing her. Her mind raced with questions and fears, but one thought shone brighter than the rest. They couldn't lose Dennis. A family united, The hospital smelled of antiseptic and fear. Fluorescent lights illuminated every corner, revealing sterile walls, and the silent bustle of nurses and doctors moving with a trained urgency. Dorothy sat on the edge of a hard plastic chair, holding Daniel tightly against her chest. Jackson paced the waiting room, his face pale, his tie askew. Every now and then, his gaze would drift to the double doors where Dennis had disappeared, wheeled away on a gurney. The boy's face, so pale and still, haunted him. A nurse walked in, a clipboard under her arm. "Mr. Carter!" Jackson turned sharply, his heart in his throat. "How is he?" "He's stable for now," the nurse said, her voice calm but serious. "The doctors are running tests to determine the cause of his collapse. We'll let you know as soon as we have more information." Dorothy's voice broke the tension. "Can we see him?" The nurse hesitated. "He's in the pediatric ward. Only one parent at a time. Boom. For now." Jackson looked at Dorothy, his expression torn. She nodded, understanding his unspoken plea. "Go," she said softly. He disappeared through the doors without a word, leaving Dorothy and Daniel alone in the suffocating silence. In the ward, Dennis lay in a small hospital bed, an IV in his arm. Machines beeped steadily beside him, their rhythm the only certainty that life still clung to him. Jackson sank into the chair beside the bed, his head in his hands. "I'm here, buddy," he whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." An hour later, a doctor called Jackson and Dorothy into a small consultation room. The tension in the air was palpable as they sat across from the young man in the white coat, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Carter, Ms. Lane," the doctor began, clasping his hands on the desk. "Dennis's tests show that he has aplastic anemia. It's a condition where the bone marrow doesn't produce enough blood cells." Dorothy caught her breath, her fingers clutching the armrest of the chair. "What does that mean? Can he recover?" The doctor's gaze softened. "The condition is life-threatening if left untreated, but there are options. He'll need a bone marrow transplant to survive." Jackson leaned forward, his voice tight. "What do we do? Test us. We'll do whatever it takes." The doctor nodded. "We'll test both of you to see if you're a match. If neither of you are, we'll search for a donor. Time is critical, so we'll need to move fast." The next day, the results came back. Neither Jackson nor Dorothy were a match. The news hit them like a punch, the air in the room seeming to thin out. "We'll search the donor registry," the doctor assured them. "But finding a match can take time, and Dennis doesn't have much." Jackson felt the walls closing in on him. He racked his brain for options, his mind stopping on a name he had avoided for days. Aaron. Later that night, Jackson stood in the dimly lit hallway outside Dennis's room. Dorothy was inside, reading softly to the boy, her voice trembling but firm. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the contact he hadn't dialed in days. Finally, he pressed it. The phone rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Jackson, this is unexpected." Jackson's jaw tightened. "Aaron, I don't have time to talk. I need your help." There was a pause. "Help? From me? How ironic." "It's not from me," Jackson said, his voice a little broken. "It's for Dennis, my son. He needs a bone marrow transplant, and neither Dorothy nor I are a match. You're the closest family we have left." Aaron's silence was deafening. Jackson could almost hear the older man's hesitation, the weight of old hurts and guilt. "Where do I need to go?" Aaron said finally, his voice lower now. 2 days later, Aaron arrived at the hospital, his presence as jarring as a ghost from a painful past. Dorothy stiffened when she saw him, her protective instincts flaring, but Jackson placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "He's here to help," Jackson said softly. Aaron nodded, his eyes uncharacteristically humble. "I'll do whatever it takes." The test results came the next morning. Jackson and Dorothy waited in tense silence as the doctor walked into the consultation room with a folder in his hand. "You'll be happy to know," the doctor began with a small smile. "Aaron is a match." Dorothy exhaled sharply, her hands covering her face as relief washed over her. Jackson leaned back in his chair, his chest heaving for a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Aaron, standing silently in the corner, simply nodded. "Let's get started then." As Aaron was prepped for the donation, Dorothy stood outside the operating room, watching him through the glass. For the first time, she saw not the man who had shattered her life, but the man who might save her son. The weight of the past had not lifted, but in that moment, hope flickered in its place, a forgiveness in the making. Aaron lay in the bed, pale and exhausted, his usual imposing presence diminished. The toll of the bone marrow donation was evident in the deep lines etched on his face and the stiffness of his posture. Yet, when Jackson walked in, Aaron's eyes snapped open, sharp and unyielding despite the physical exhaustion. Jackson hesitated near the door, his hands in his pockets, his movements uncertain, a sharp contrast to the confident man he used to be. This was not a conversation he had prepared for, but it was one he could not avoid. "Don't just stand there like a stranger," Aaron said, his voice hoarse but firm. "Sit down." Jackson pulled a chair closer to the bed, the legs scraping softly against the tiled floor. For a moment he said nothing, his gaze fixed on his uncle's weathered features. "How are you feeling?" he finally asked. His voice low. Aaron let out a dry laugh, the sound more air than mirth. "Like someone hit me with a sledgehammer, but I'll survive." Jackson nodded, his jaw tight. "Thank you for doing this." Aaron waved a weak hand, dismissing the gratitude. "It's the least I could do." His voice grew softer, tinged with something Jackson couldn't quite identify. "You shouldn't have had to call me. None of this should have happened." Jackson leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "You're right, it shouldn't have. But it did, and now we're here." Aaron sighed, his chest rising and falling heavily. "I made mistakes, Jackson. I thought I was protecting you, keeping you focused on what mattered, building your future, your legacy." He turned his head slightly, meeting Jackson's gaze. "I see now that I was wrong." Jackson's fingers tightened around the edge of his chair. "You didn't just make mistakes, Aaron. You destroyed lives. You and my mother decided that Dorothy wasn't good enough, and you tore us apart." His voice broke, the anger transforming into something raw, something closer to pain. Aaron did not flinch under the weight of Jackson's words. Instead, he nodded, accepting them. "You're right," he said simply. "We did. And it's something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life." Silence stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. "I hated you," Jackson admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I hated what you did, how you justified it. But now, seeing you here, doing this for Dennis," he trailed off, shaking his head, as if trying to make sense of the conflicting emotions churning inside him. Aaron's lips curled into a weak, tired smile. "Jackson, redemption is not an easy journey. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that it's never too late to try." Jackson's shoulders slumped slightly, the tension giving way. He looked at his hands, his silence becoming more forgiving. "You're doing the right thing," he said finally, his voice firm. "For Dennis, for all of us." Aaron's smile widened a bit. "I'm trying." Later that night, Jackson stood in the hallway outside Aaron's room, his head resting against the cool wall. The weight of the day pressed down on him, but for the first time in a long time, it felt manageable, like a burden he could share. Dorothy walked up, her steps soft against the tiled floor. She stopped beside him, her expression unreadable. "How is he?" "He's tired," Jackson responded, straightening his posture. "But he's okay." Dorothy nodded, her gaze drifting toward the door. She hesitated, her hands toying with the hem of her sweater. "I want to see him." Jackson raised an eyebrow in slight surprise. Are you sure? She looked at him, her eyes steady. He saved Dennis's life. I owe him that. Jackson stepped aside, watching as she pushed the door open and disappeared inside. The family reconciliation. Aaron looked up as Dorothy entered, his expression shifting from surprise to something softer. Dorothy, he greeted her, his voice weak. I wasn't sure if you would want to see me. Dorothy closed the door behind her, the click of the latch louder than she intended. I wasn't sure either, she admitted, moving to the chair Jackson had vacated earlier. A silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Dorothy's fingers tightened around her arms as she searched for a way to begin. Why did you do it? She finally asked. Her voice lower now. Aaron turned his head to look at her, his eyes tired but clear, holding none of the arrogance she remembered. I owed him, he said simply. Owed Dennis, owed Jackson, owed you. And you. Her brow furrowed, her defenses rising instinctively. Don't think this erases what you did. I don't, he replied quickly, his tone earnest. I'm not looking for forgiveness, Dorothy. I don't deserve it. But I had to do something, anything, to make things right. She looked at him, her arms falling to her sides. You destroyed my life, Aaron. You and Patricia. You didn't just take Jackson from me. You took his children from him. Do you even understand what that means? Aaron's expression darkened, his guilt etched in the lines of his face. I understand it better now than I did back then, he admitted. At the time, I thought I was protecting Jackson, protecting the family. But all I did was destroy it. I see that now. I've seen it every day for the last 5 years. Dorothy's throat tightened, her anger mixing with a pang of unexpected compassion. Why now? She asked. Why help now, after everything? Aaron exhaled heavily, his gaze dropping to his hands. I witnessed its disintegration, Dorothy. I saw Jackson lose the light he once had, and then I saw Dennis, so small and fragile, and I knew I had to help. For them, for you, even if it doesn't change anything between us. Her eyes filled with tears, and she blinked rapidly to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. She didn't want to feel compassion for him, nor did she want to see the man beneath the damage he had caused. You've caused so much pain, she said, her voice trembling. You can't just fix it with one beneficial action. I know, he said softly, but I had to start somewhere. Dorothy looked at him for a long time, her emotions in turmoil. Finally, she reached out, her hands clasped in front of her ear. Thank you, she said in a low voice, for Dennis, for helping him. Aaron's lips curled into the faintest of smiles. It's the least I could do. Later, Jackson walked into the room, his footsteps hesitant. Aaron looked at his nephew, his expression unreadable. Dorothy told me you wanted to see me, Jackson said, stopping near the foot of the bed. Aaron nodded, his face softening slightly. Sit down, he said. Jackson pulled a chair closer, his posture rigid, his arms resting on his knees. The two men sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared history pressing heavily between them. I owe you an apology, Aaron began. His voice firm but low. Jackson's brow furrowed, his jaw tightened. You think an apology is enough? No, Aaron admitted, but it's all I have. Jackson leaned back, his expression hard. You destroyed everything, Aaron. You helped my mother tear my family apart. You made Dorothy believe I betrayed her. You made me lose the first 5 years of my children's lives. How do I forgive that? Aaron's gaze did not waver. Don't, he said simply. But I hope you let me help you move forward. I can't undo what I've done, but I can try to make sure you never have to feel that kind of loss again. Jackson's lips formed a delicate line, his gratitude for Aaron's sacrifice clashing with his lingering resentment. Finally, he nodded, though his expression remained defensive. You've taken the first step. Let's see if you can keep going. Aaron smiled faintly, his exhaustion evident. That seems fair enough. For the first time, Dorothy saw a glimpse of the family they could become. A fragile hope that perhaps, even after everything, redemption was possible. The wedding, the hospital hallways quietly buzzed with the muffled sounds of life, the steady beep of monitors, the soft shuffle of nurses' feet, the whir of wheels against the polished floor. Dorothy walked slowly toward the pediatric ward, her thoughts heavy with the weight of all that had happened. Daniel gripped her hand tightly, his wide eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. She was halfway down the hall to Dennis's room when she stopped abruptly, seeing a familiar figure standing near the nurse's station. Patricia. The older woman's presence was both imposing and strangely subdued. Her tailored coat hung neatly over her arm. A bouquet of daisies and a small toy wrapped in glossy paper rested against her chest. Dorothy froze, unsure whether to retreat or approach. Patricia turned, her gaze locking with Dorothy's. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the air between them crackling with unresolved tension. "I didn't think you would still be here," Patricia said, breaking the silence. Her tone was calm, almost casual, but her eyes betrayed something deeper. "I could say the same about you," Dorothy replied, her voice measured. Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. She looked toward the ward, her expression unreadable. "Aaron called me," she said finally. "He told me everything." Dorothy's stomach clenched. "He did?" Patricia nodded, her gaze shifting back to Dorothy. "I suppose he thought I needed to understand the consequences of my actions." "And do you?" Dorothy asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Patricia flinched, a flash of something, perhaps regret, crossing her face. She stepped closer, holding out the bouquet and the toy. "These are for Dennis," she said, her tone softening. "I thought he might like them." Dorothy hesitated before taking the items. The flowers were simple but elegant, their bright petals a stark contrast to the heaviness of the moment. The toy was a small teddy bear, its cheerful smile almost mocking. "Thank you," Dorothy said, her voice cautious. Patricia's eyes lingered on her grandson, who clung tightly to Dorothy's leg. For a brief moment, her cold demeanor melted, replaced by something almost maternal. "He's a beautiful boy," Patricia said in a low voice. Dorothy looked down at Daniel, running a hand through his curls. "He is." Patricia straightened, her mask of composure back in place. "I should go," she said, backing away. "I didn't come here to intrude. I just wanted to see how he was." Before Dorothy could reply, Patricia turned and began to walk away. Jackson arrived moments later, his face tense with worry. He saw Patricia disappearing down the hallway and immediately tensed. "What was she doing here?" he demanded, his voice low but intense. "She brought flowers and a toy for Dennis," Dorothy replied, watching his reaction carefully. Jackson's jaw tightened. "I don't trust her. She's done enough damage. I won't let her." "Jackson," Dorothy interrupted him, placing a hand on his arm. "Let her go." His brow furrowed as he turned to her. "You think I should just let her walk in here like nothing happened? She almost ruined us." Dorothy's gaze softened, her voice firm. "She's a mother, Jackson. Everything she did, however misguided, she did because she thought she was protecting you. I don't agree with her choices, but I understand them." Jackson's expression wavered, his anger giving way to a reluctant comprehension. "And now you trust her?" "I don't know if I'll ever trust her," Dorothy admitted, "but I see someone who is trying, in her own way, to make things right, and that has to count for something." "Wow." Jackson exhaled heavily, running a hand through his hair. "She has a lot to answer for." "Yes, she does," Dorothy nodded. "But we're not the only ones carrying the weight of the past. Let her carry her own. We have enough of our own to deal with." The bouquet of flowers sat in a small vase on Dennis's bedside table, its bright petals adding a touch of color to the sterile room. The teddy bear rested on Dennis's pillow, a small smile on his pale face as he slept. Dorothy stood at the foot of the bed, watching him breathe, her hand brushing Daniel's curls. Jackson was by her side, his arm lightly touching hers. In that moment, the weight of Patricia's actions felt distant, overshadowed by the fragile hope of Dennis's recovery and the quiet resilience of their family. Later that night, as Dorothy sat alone by Dennis's bed, the hospital quiet around her, she found herself replaying Patricia's words in her mind. The past was not something she could forget, but maybe, for the sake of her sons, she could learn to move forward. The following days after Dennis's surgery passed in a blur of cautious optimism. His color began to return, the shadows under his eyes faded, and his voice, once weak, grew firmer. Dorothy and Jackson divided their time between the hospital and home, slowly settling into a rhythm that, though fragile, held the seeds of something lasting. One afternoon, Dorothy walked into the kitchen to find Jackson sitting at the table with Daniel, carefully putting together a puzzle. The boy's tongue stuck out in concentration as he placed the last piece. "There," Jackson said, his voice warm. "It fits perfectly. Like a team, huh?" Daniel smiled, his shy grin illuminating his face. Dorothy stopped in the doorway, the quiet domesticity of the scene stirring something deep within her. "You're so good with him," she said softly, walking into the room. Jackson looked up, a small smile on his lips. "He makes it easy." Dorothy did not reply, but her chest tightened at the sight of them. It wasn't just Jackson's attention to the children that moved her. It was the patience, the care, and the unyielding determination to be present. Over time, small moments accumulated, forming the foundation of something Dorothy had believed lost. Over shared meals, Jackson would ask about the boys' favorite games and help Daniel navigate his picky eating habits. During bedtime stories, Dennis would insist that Jackson do all the voices. Jackson would sit across from Dorothy during quiet, late-night conversations, sharing his thoughts freely without being demanding. One night, after the children were asleep, Dorothy found Jackson standing on the balcony, a glass of water in his hand. The city lights twinkled all around them, bathing his face in a soft glow. She joined him, leaning against the railing. "You've been different," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He turned to her, his brow furrowed slightly. "Different," she nodded. "Your drive was unyielding. You were always so focused on your work, but you seem to have found a way to slow down." Jackson chuckled softly, setting down his glass. "I had to lose everything to realize what mattered most." "What mattered most, Dorothy, was never the work. It was always you, and them." Her heart ached, the sincerity in his voice cutting through the layers of doubt she had built around herself. "I'm trying to trust again," she admitted, her voice shaking a little. "It's not easy." "I know," he said, "and I don't expect it to be. But I'll be here. For as long as it takes." A week later, as Dennis's recovery continued, Jackson surprised Dorothy during one of their quiet moments. "I've been thinking," he said, his tone light, but his eyes serious. "About what?" she asked, tilting her head. Jackson reached into his pocket, pulling out a small box. Dorothy's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a simple, elegant ring. "I don't want to waste any more time," he said. "I want us to be a family again. Officially. I know it's soon, and I know we still have a lot to work on. But I love you, Dorothy. I've always loved you, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you." Dorothy stared at the ring, her emotions at war. It was everything she had once dreamed of, but the weight of the past still lingered. "Jackson," she began, her voice firm but soft. "This means more to me than I can say, but I need time. I need time to be sure that I'm ready, to be sure that we're ready." His shoulders relaxed slightly, and he nodded, his smile understanding. "Take all the time you need. The offer will always be here." A few days later, a package arrived at the apartment. Jackson opened it and found a carefully wrapped box and a letter addressed to him. Dorothy joined him as he unfolded the paper, the familiar scrawl of Aaron filling the page. Jackson, by the time you read this, I'll be on my way to New York. My daughter has invited me to stay with her, and I think it's time to leave Houston behind. Helping Dennis reminded me of what truly matters, and though I can't undo the damage I caused, I hope I've taken a small step in repairing what was broken. I wish you, Dorothy, and the boys all the happiness in the world. You deserve it, Aaron. Inside the box was a set of handmade wooden blocks, intricately carved and painted. Jackson turned them over in his hands, his expression unreadable. Dorothy placed a hand on his arm. It's his way of saying goodbye, and maybe it's his way of starting over, he said softly. Jackson nodded, his grip tightening around the blocks. As Dorothy watched Jackson carefully place the blocks on the children's room bookshelf, she felt a shift inside herself, a tentative but undeniable hope. Perhaps, she thought, they really could rebuild. The end. A setting sun bathed the backyard in golden hues, its warm light casting long shadows over the rows of carefully arranged chairs. White flowers adorned the edges of the aisle, their soft petals fluttering in the breeze. The air was filled with the murmur of close friends and the occasional giggling of the children, who stood near Jackson, each dressed in a smart suit. Dennis and Daniel held small velvet boxes in their hands, their excitement barely contained. Dennis whispered something to his brother, and Daniel nodded solemnly, clutching his box tighter. Jackson stood at the end of the aisle, his suit impeccable, and his tie slightly askew, a small tell of his nervousness. His eyes, however, were steady, focused on the other end of the path where Dorothy would appear. Dorothy took a deep breath, standing just out of sight. The soft fabric of her dress brushed against her legs, and she held a small bouquet of lavender and white roses. Her heart pounded, not with fear, but with anticipation. A delicate, yet powerful mix of emotions that coursed through her body with each passing second. When the music began, she took a step forward, the gentle notes guiding her down the aisle. She looked up, and there he was, Jackson. He was the man who had shattered her heart, and now he was helping to put it back together. Their eyes met, and in them she saw the unwavering love and determination that had led them to this moment. With each step, the weight of their shared journey pressed gently against her chest, the scars of the past mixing with the hope of the future. The boys stood beside Jackson, their faces lighting up as she drew near. When she reached the end, Jackson extended his hand. She hesitated for a moment before placing hers in his, the warmth of his touch grounding her. "You're stunning," he whispered, his voice just loud enough for her to hear. A small smile touched her lips. "You don't look so bad yourself." The officiant began to speak, but Dorothy's focus was entirely on Jackson. The vows they exchanged were simple but powerful, each word a testament to the journey they had endured. "I promise to never again take for granted what we have," Jackson said, his voice firm but moved. "To honor the strength it took for you to trust me again, and to be the man that you and the boys deserve." Tears glistened in Dorothy's eyes as she responded, her voice trembling but resolute. "I promise to let go of the fear that kept us apart. I promise to build with you a life that may not be perfect, but will be uniquely ours. I want to be, once again, the partner you've shown me I can be." The world seemed to stop as they slid the rings onto each other's fingers, the small bands of gold glinting in the fading light. The ceremony ended in laughter as Dennis and Daniel proudly carried the rings to their parents, each boy determined to present his box first. Jackson crouched down, hugging them both tightly. "We did it, boys," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We're officially a team." Dorothy knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around the group. It was a messy, beautiful hug, and for a moment nothing else mattered. From a distance, Patricia watched the scene. She stood near the edge of the garden, her figure silhouetted against the glow of the setting sun. Her expression was unreadable, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She did not approach. She did not say a word. But as the new family laughed and embraced, something in her posture softened. The celebration was small, but warm, filled with clinking glasses, shared stories, and the sound of Dennis and Daniel chasing each other through the garden. Dorothy found herself laughing freely, her hand often finding Jackson's as they navigated the night together. As the evening drew to a close, Jackson and Dorothy stood at the edge of the garden, watching the boys chase fireflies under the twinkling lights strung in the trees. "Did you ever think we'd get here?" she asked, leaning into him. Jackson slid an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "Not for a while," he admitted. "But I knew I would fight for it. For us." She tilted her head up, her eyes shining. "And now," he said, his voice soft but sure, "I know this is where we were always meant to be." Dorothy rested her head on his shoulder, her gaze shifting to their sons. The boys' laughter filled the air, blending seamlessly with the gentle hum of the night. Patricia was standing near the door as the guests began to leave, her silhouette barely visible in the dim light. She turned away without a word, her head held high, but her footsteps were slow and deliberate. In the garden, Jackson pulled Dorothy into a soft embrace, their children joining in as they all collapsed onto the lawn in a tangle of laughter and love. The scars of the past would always remain, but in that moment, they were simply a family, whole and unbreakable. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you have any other stories you'd like me to translate or write, please feel free to ask.